Hello everybody, the Chronicler here. This is my first video, a little bit of a trial run more or less to see how things go and whether people enjoy the format. Feel free to comment at the end on any points you may have, whether you enjoy the style of explanation, how I can improve, and anything you'd like to see explained for future videos. Once again, I hope you're educated and I hope you enjoy. So, for our first topic, we'll be going over something very simple, but which still raises some matter of subjection. Obviously, if we were tackling the Second World War or Watergate, we'd have something more concrete. Instead, today we'll be discussing the corrupt bargain, which occurred during the United States election of 1824 between Kentucky Senator turned Secretary of State Henry Clay and John Quincy Adams, a mutton chops model, and the Secretary of State under James Monroe. In understanding this event, we'll use the 5W method. Finding the who, what, where, when, and why. This is a simple formula and mostly keeps us from deviating away from the primary pointers and prevents us from jumping all over the place. The when is quite simple. This was the election of 1824 and spanned from October of 1824 into February of 1825. It's hard to pinpoint a where here, as it encompasses the entirety of America. In a figurative sense, though, this was a battle fought in Washington, D.C. specifically. As for the who, now I already went into minor detail. I mentioned John Quincy Adams and Henry Clay. All major individuals involved ran as nominees during the election of 1824. All were Democratic Republicans, as the crumbling Federalist Party lost any remaining power from its failure during the Hartford Convention, which proposed secession of New England from the Union in protest of the quote-unquote failing war effort. Adams was a Secretary of State during the presidency of James Monroe, our fifth president, and was also highly acclaimed as a scholar. He was fluent in French, Dutch, Greek, and Latin. He'd earned a Master's of Arts from Harvard in 1790. He'd practiced law. Overall, kind of a big deal. The problem, politically, was that he was renowned for being like his father. Although a moderate, he was stubborn to change, not founded by himself. He was also too trusting of parity, a curse which would haunt his eventual presidency. Henry Clay was also mentioned, and he would become a bit more important to the American eye in the coming decades. Clay was similarly stubborn, matching Adams in his personality. He largely represented the desire for Western expansion in the blossoming republic, and also ran in the election of 1824 as a Democratic Republican like many of his cohorts. The last two characters to acknowledge here are Andrew Jackson and, to a lesser extent, William H. Crawford. Jackson was a wartime hero of the War of 1812 and the Battle of New Orleans less than a decade earlier. Crawford was the least directly involved in the corrupt bargain, but important to note is that he, too, ran under the benefit of being Secretary of Treasury under James Monroe. This brings us to the what. Adams was set as the successor to Monroe, much like how John Adams succeeded Washington. Aside from this, however, each candidate held their own strengths, but as other candidates were still, as Daniel W. Howe writes in his book What Hath God Wrought? The Transformation of America, quote, playing the game of the old-fashioned way. Jackson's cause, based on his popularity, exemplified and benefited from the changing nature of presidential campaigns and the changing role of the electorate. The election of 1824 ended in a standstill. Although Jackson, hero and celebrity, won the most electoral votes, no candidate had won the majority, and for that reason the decision fell to the House of Representatives. Despite having 4 options to choose from, it was quickly narrowed down to only 2. Clay, believing not to be capable of winning, largely abandoned his efforts to force himself into the presidency. Crawford suffered from a stroke which paralyzed him, preventing him from running any further, both literally and figuratively. Clay despised Jackson and was also not involved in the nomination by the House due to the stipulations under the Constitution. Wanting to receive Clay's states backed by the House, Adams made a deal with Clay to get backing in exchange for making him the Secretary of State. This may sound rather random, but it's important to note that making someone your Secretary of State propped a person much closer to the next presidency. At least that is what it had shown for the last 5 presidents. The House voted in favor of Adams, and he won the election of 1824. Which finally gets us to the why. The corrupt bargain at the time was a term coined by Jackson and his aptly named Jacksonian supporters, who saw that Clay taking the position in exchange for power was unjust. After all, it had essentially been an equal exchange, which put both of them high in the political tier. It would go on to haunt Adams' entire single term. In a boastful inaugural address which promoted the expansion of public works that had mirrored Monroe's growth policies, politicians became outraged. This strict separation of influence for Adams against the growth of Jacksonian philosophy paved his defeat in the election of 1828 and led to the continuation of a split after the death of the Federalists, with Adams's National Republican Party and the later Whig Party. Was Jackson and his supporters in the right? Did Adams perform an unjust action with an unjust term in office? By the constitutionality of the matter, no. Morally, it is up to the personal decider. Given the facts, Adams acted based on a natural political move. He did not steal anything, such as how Jackson claims, nor did he break any official laws. The popular vote, as it has been proven most recently in the 2016 election, is not a determinant, and is left up to the representative vote to decide. The Electoral College could not, and so it was left, justly, to the House. With that said, Adams's actions before, during, and after are left up entirely to the thoughts of the analyst, and one should not confine their outlook of this topic. Many other writers of the antebellum period and the second party system alone have written on this topic. Once again, Daniel Walker Howe's What Hath God Wrought is an excellent analysis governmentally. For the period as a whole and how it was shaped, I suggest James and Dorothy Vollo's The Antebellum Period, or The Birth of Modern Politics by Lynn H. Parsons. They both focus on the election of 1828 for the most part, but of course, in the case of the latter, to understand that, there is a good deal of background on the election of 1824. I would say about 40 or 50 pages worth of content in Chapter 2 and 3. Thank you all so much for watching. Be sure to tune in more weekly or every week and a half. I hope you enjoyed. Please make sure to like the video and once again comment if you have any advice for the future or want to hear about other topics, or if you just want to leave your opinion. I always love to hear what people have to say. And if you really enjoyed it, a subscription is always appreciated. Thank you all. This has been the Chronicler, signing off.